Hey YouTube, this is PokéCastXVll here, and today I have for you the top 8 decks from the Brazil Latin American International Championships. With this season's format changing in terms of tournament structure, the international events are attended by players from all over the world in obtaining an invite to the World Championships held in August. The internationals are very comparable with the national championships from last season and offer a lot in terms of CP and prizes. Again, hundreds of players turn up to compete, but in the end there can only be one winner. Before we get started with the top 8 decks, I have just a few things to let you all know. The first is if you do like Pokemon related content and videos about the Pokemon TCG, as well as videos about Pokemon in general, you can hit that subscribe button to keep posted for future uploads. Secondly, in regards to the video, this video will feature on the ProPokemon website, and if you'd like to check them out, along with other Pokemon related content, you can do so by clicking the link within the description box below. And finally, I'll keep to not mentioning the names of the players who piloted these decks, however you can find all the information again within the description box below. Keep in mind that the sets legal for this tournament were Primal Clash through to Sun and Moon, which is why you don't see any cards from the current Guardians Rising set. And with all that said and done, let's begin.
Number 8.
In 8th spot, we have Volcanion EX. Volcanion being a fire type was always going to be a popular choice, considering how popular Decidueye is within the format. The concept of the deck is pretty simple. You have Volcanion EX's ability Steam Up, which allows you to discard a fire energy from your hand, and in doing so deals an additional 30 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon when attacking with a fire type. Not forgetting that this stacks, so you can use it more than once, bumping it up by 30 every time. Not only does this bump up your attack, but it also allows you to lead with the non-EX Volcanion, as Power Heater deals 20 damage, plus more if you've used Steam Up, but also allows you to recover 2 fire energy from your discard pile and attach them to 2 different Pokemon on your bench, making a great and powerful energy accelerator. Later game, once you have enough fire energy on your Volcanion EXs, you can then use Steam Up a couple of times and one-shot pretty much most things within the format with Volcanic Heat. It does have a side effect, which means that you can't attack the following turn with the same Volcanion EX, so playing cards like Floatstone, Escape Rope, and Olympia are a must as you want to maintain the pressure on your opponent. Other techs you can also include are things like Max Elixir, since you do run a high count of energy cards, and of course Fisherman and Energy Retrieval to recover those energy later game to use Steam Up. And with all that said, here is a list that came in 8th spot. Most Volcanion decks usually play a single Hooper EX as a means of searching out your Volcanion EXs and your Shaman EXs, as well as allowing a much more consistent setup early game. The choice of Stadium is also optional. In this list we do have 2 Scorched Earth and a Parallel City to knock off unnecessary things like Hooper EX and Shaman EX, however in some cases you could even run Skyfield for the extra bench space. In the end, a very solid deck and one worthy of finishing in the top 8.
Number 7.
In 7th spot comes the Decui Vileplume, a deck that's been doing extremely well in the current metagame just because of how well it functions under item lock, while your opponent is left without much to work with. The deck stems from Decidueye GX, which is a stage 2 grass type, 240 HP with 2 attacks, a GX attack and an ability. Feather Arrow once during your turn allows you to place 2 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. Again, this stacks, so if you have more than one Decidueye GX, you can place 2 more damage counters and so on. This does build up over a period of time and certainly does add up a lot of damage, especially when you're only hitting 90 in the process. Moving on, we have Razor Leaf, which for a grass and 2 colourless deals a solid 90 damage, 2-shotting most standard EXs within the format. Finally, its GX attack in Hello Hunt for a single grass energy allows you to recover 3 cards from your discard pile, which is so integral to this deck when you're running thin on things like energy cards, or you need something like that last Lysander for the final KO. It does have a weakness to fire and just the 2 retreat cost. While it is a stage 2, you do have cards like Forest of Giant Plants, which enables you to get out Decidueye on a single turn. And on the topic of getting out stage 2s in a single turn, we have its partner in crime in Vileplume, which when set up, prevents either player from playing item cards from their hand. One of Vileplume's biggest weakness is its hefty retreat cost, however, when you have a Floatstone attached to either your Gloom or your Oddish before evolving, this gives your Vileplume free retreat, as Irritating Pollen only prevents you from playing more item cards from your hand and doesn't shut off the ones already in play. Your alternate attackers in this deck are things like Lugia EX, as Error Ball deals 20 damage times the number of energy attached to both players' active Pokemon. When you consider that you have Feather Arrow and a Lugia EX, which makes it difficult for you to attach energy to your active Pokemon, without a heavy retaliation along with item lock, it certainly does make for an intimidating deck to play against. The main core of this deck stems from playing a heavy count of Ultra Ball, which feeds out your Shaman EXs and allows you to go through your deck quicker to get out all the resources that you need. You also do run a high count of Trainer's Mail and Level Ball, all used for setting up your Decidueyes and Vileplumes and feeding out the essentials that you need, not forgetting that you still have your supporter for the turn. And with all that said, here is the list that was used. In setting up, it's very common that you do have to discard a lot of Pokemon that you aren't able to initially put onto the bench, which is where the two Revitalizers come in handy. On the off chance, should you encounter any Garbodor, you do have Beedrill EX, which functions off a single Grass Energy in Double Scrapper, removing up to 2 tool cards from your opponent's Pokemon. Keeping in mind that if Vileplume is out, then they won't be able to reattach any more tools. This deck, when set up properly, is probably one of the most intimidating decks to play against in the format, and one that we fully expected to feature in the top 8.
Number 6.
At 6th spot, we have another Volcanion EX deck. Since we've already discussed how the deck functions, let's take a look at the list and see if we can spot any notable differences. On the surface, it does look very similar, however, it does run a single Salamence EX. This is a play that we've seen before, as Salamence hits 10 damage, plus 50 more for each EX Pokemon that your opponent has out for a single Fire Energy and 2 Colorless, with its Beastly Fang attack. This certainly does come in handy when you're playing against decks like Mega Rayquaza, as the whole deck is pretty much built from EXs, and even when you come up against the mirror, and they've got loads of Volcanion EXs and Shaman EXs out. The other thing that I noticed is that unlike the last player, is that this player doesn't play any copies of Pokemon Ranger, which means things like Jolteon EX can be tough, although you do play things like Escape Rope and Lysander to try and get around it, as well as the 2 Skyfield and 1 Scorched Earth, but no Parallel City. Again, with Grass being quite prominent within the format, it only made sense that Volcanion would excel, coming in at 6th place.
Number 5.
And at 5th spot, we have Turbo Darkrai. Darkrai and the Dark archetype has always been quite popular, and overall is just a very consistent deck. Darkrai's attack Dark Pulse deals 20 damage, plus 20 more for each Darkness Energy attached to all of your Pokemon. When you consider that you play Fighting Fury Belt, also dealing 10 more damage but also bumping up your HP by 40, Darkrai does become quite a tank, 1 or 2 shotting most things within the format, as well as being quite hard to take down. Your main focus with Darkrai is trying to compile energy onto your side of the board, so playing for Max Elixir is a no-brainer. You also do run a couple of Yveltals just for its Oblivion Wing attack, which recovers energy, as well as EXP share to preserve the energy you already have, as once knocked out, you'll be able to move the energy onto another Pokemon with an EXP share attached. And with all that said, here is the list. You do, like Volcanion, run 1 Hooper EX, just to get out your Darkrai's early game, as well as Shaman EXs. The high count of playing 3 Lysander is certainly interesting, as it does allow you to pick off things on the bench much more easily, and since stadiums are open, most Darkrai decks usually play a combination between Parallel City, which gets rid of unwanted Lysander and KO targets on your side, such as Shaman and Hooper EXs, and Silent Lab, which puts in a lot of work against decks like Volcanion and Mega Rayquaza, since it does stop Shaman and Hooper EXs from using their abilities. Overall, a really consistent deck, and one that I do really like in this current format, finishing in at 5th place.
Number 4.
At 4th spot, again we have another Decidueye Vileplume deck, so let's go straight into the list and see how it compares with the one that we've seen so far. This deck focuses on only having 3 Grass Energy in exchange to 4, and runs a single Tauros GX instead of running the second Lugia EX, which can be quite risky considering under item lock, Tauros can be quite hard to retreat when having a 3 retreat cost, but nonetheless certainly comes in handy in certain situations. But moving on from that, the deck is more or less the same, with a few minor touches such as the 4th Trainer's Mail, where the last deck only played 3, and interestingly 3 Lysander, which the last deck only played 2, finishing all the way in the semi-finals at 4th place.
Number 3.
In 3rd place, we have Mega Rayquaza. This deck has started to feature a little more just because of its sheer speed and how it can one-shot almost anything within the format. This deck stems from Rayquaza EX, to which you attach a Spirit Link to it and then Mega Evolve without passing your turn, and thanks to Mega Rayquaza's evolution trait, you can do this all in a single turn. Following that, you then have Skyfield, which allows you to put up to 8 Pokemon on your bench at once, fueling for Mega Rayquaza's Emerald Break attack, dealing a potential 240 damage all in a single turn. This deck does consist of things like Hooper and Shaman EX to fill up your bench quickly and to draw through your deck more efficiently, as well as Dragonite EX to recover basic Pokemon from your discard pile. Normally you can play other techs such as Manaphy EX or Magearna EX, however in this case, this player has chosen to go all out on consistency and using those spots to add cards like Brock's Grit to recover basic energy and Oranguru, which certainly adds to consistency, as well as bailing you out from late game ends. Since the type of basic energy is open, as all of your Pokemon used for attacking are colourless typing, it only makes sense to play either fire or fighting, as you can utilise your opponent's Scorched Earth, with Volcanion being extremely popular at the moment. With all that said, let's go into the deck. What I do really like about this is that it does run 4 Puzzle of Time, which when speeding through your deck are quite likely to have 2 at the same time. In doing so, you can recover pretty much anything from your discard pile, and the 3 Mega Turbo is pretty standard, as you want to be attaching 2 energy in a single turn, ideally a double colourless and a fire energy, as well as one of supporters like Olympia and Skylar. Overall, a really solid and powerful deck, finishing up all the way in 3rd spot.
Number 2.
In 2nd spot we have another Decui Vileplume deck, which shows how powerful this deck is that it's featured this many times. Let's go straight into the list. It is very similar to the first list we saw, although the obvious and most notable difference is the 1/1 line of Yanmega, which functions very similar to Yanmega Prime back in the Heart Gold Soul Silver series. With its Sonic Vision ability, it allows you to ignore the energy requirements for its Assault Boom attack and punishes your opponent if they decide to lay down any tool cards. However, you do have to have exactly 4 cards in your hand for its ability to come in play. This list does for that reason play only 3 Grass Energy, and goes down the route of playing 2 Lugia EX, much like the first player, and interestingly only 2 Shaman EXs. Again, no surprise this deck came all the way in 2nd spot.
Number 1.
And finally, in 1st place, believe it or not, we have another Decui Vileplume deck. This list does warrant some looking into, just because it's slightly different to the list we've seen already. Rather than play grass, this deck utilises Rainbow Energy, which runs off Pokemon being able to use a single energy and a double colourless energy to attack, although with Rainbow Energy you do put 1 damage counter on your Pokemon. This is a small price to pay, as in this case, this build is referred to as more of a walls deck, as you do run things like Regice and Jolteon EX to block both basic and EX Pokemon with their attacks. Much like Decidueye, what all these Pokemon have in common is that they only need a single energy, which is where Rainbow Energy comes in handy, and the single double colourless energy. With Vileplume in place, preventing your opponent from playing any item cards, Decidueye piling on the damage with Feather Arrow, and preventing all damage done to your Regice and Jolteon EX with their attacks, sometimes there really is not too much that you can do, leaving you to having to concede the game to your opponent. And with all that said, let's take a look at the list. You do still run the 1 Lugia EX, but other than that, the core of the deck is more or less the same. You have Decidueye's GX attack and Revitalizer to recover things should you need to, and your standard supporters on top of 3 Shaman EXs. And with all that said, that is pretty much it. That was the top 8 decks from the Brazil International Championships. If you did like this video and you would like to see more Pokemon related content, you can do so by checking out the annotations at the end of this video. Alternatively, you can also find me on Facebook, and if you want to, you can also check out ProPokemon. All the links will be in the description box below. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all next time.